So here's a diagram that tries to capture what I mentioned a moment ago. If our question is, what kinds of things are there in the most basic, fundamental sense? What are the ultimate constituents of the universe? The dualist will say there are two fundamental kinds of things, mental and physical, of course, and more precisely, mental phenomena, thoughts, experiences, emotions perhaps, are not identical with or otherwise reducible to anything physical, whereas the monist is going to hold there's only one kind of thing. Notice that monism does not require that one holds that that one kind of thing that there is must be physical. There's a perhaps exotic version of monism that says that the only things that exist are in a sense mental. That is, all things are mental in some sense. Now, this idealist position is going to have some explaining to do to account for what seems like the reality of tables and chairs, stars, planets, and so on. But that idealistic position is one that you might want to explore, think about how it would go, and perhaps take more advanced coursework in philosophy to learn more about. For our purposes, we'll focus on materialism, which is the view that says not only is the one kind of thing that exists, but in fact that one kind of thing is all and only material things. As you can imagine, the materialist monist is going to have some explaining to do to account for how minds can be understood in purely material terms or physical terms. So first, though, I want to discuss dualism and the difficulties we might have with it. Here's one classic question you might raise for the dualist position. How could mental and physical things interact if they are different kinds of substance in this most fundamental way? Yet it seems they do it all the time. That is, for example, I make a decision, there's a mental event that occurs that says, for example, in just a moment I'm going to raise my finger. And now, here goes, I just raised my finger. Ta-da! Nothing very special about that. On the dualist position, that seems to be a case in which a mental event brings about a physical event. But if you're a dualist, it's not at all clear how that happens, not because there's a logical contradiction in the idea of something non-physical affecting something physical, but because the idea of something non-physical affecting something physical seems to violate our view about how physical things interact and behave. According to our best scientific theories, we might think of the physical world as causally closed. By that I mean, if a physical event has a cause at all, it's got a purely physical cause. We'll see when we discuss the problem of free will, the possibility that some physical events might be uncaused. But for those physical events that are caused, they have a purely physical cause. That's the stuff of your Physics 101 textbook, that whenever there's a physical change, that can be explained in terms of such equations as F equals ma. Whereas if you're a dualist, you're going to have to hold that when that finger went up, part at least of what caused it was that it was brought about by a non-physical, because mental event. That seems mysterious, and not just mysterious, but also it seems to run counter to our conception of what physical causation, physical explanation actually comes to. And it goes the other way as well. That is, physical events bring about mental phenomena. Someone can take a pin and prick my arm with it. I will feel pain. That seems, on the dualist account, to be a case in which a physical change brings about a mental event. And yet that seems mysterious, if only because it would seem that these mental events appear to be causally closed off from the physical events with which they somehow or at least are correlated. So that's one. The problem of mind-body interaction is one problem, not a decisive knockdown objection or reductio ad absurdum of dualism, but it's supposed to turn the heat up for the dualist. And here's another way of turning up the heat for the dualist. It's the question, how can I know anything about the minds of others if in fact dualism is true? That is, I can make hypotheses about other people being brought to perform the behaviors that they do by virtue of the supposition that they've got thoughts, intentions, plans, emotions, experiences that bring those things about. But in fact, it seems I could never know for sure what's going on outside of my own mind, because after all, if I were to take another human body that I thought perhaps might be the possessor of some thoughts, and, for example, perhaps with the help of Zeke, take their central nervous system, or at least their cranium, their brain out of their cranium and cut it open, all I'd see is neurons, blood, and other such like in the central nervous system. Wouldn't be able to see any thoughts. Those look like they're, by definition, not observable from an external objective point of view. So if that's right, the best I could ever do in knowing about the minds of others is make a defeasible conjecture. But just as mind-body interaction seems to be a part of everyday common sense experience of minds and how they interact with the world, contrary to what seems to be the case as predicted by dualism, so too dualism seems to predict that the best I could ever do by way of my knowledge of other minds is a defeasible hypothesis. And yet it seems common sense suggests that at least sometimes I can not just make a hypothesis, but actually know what somebody else is thinking, feeling, experiencing, etc. Now, that might seem controversial to some people, but I want you to just keep in mind that your everyday intuitions about people that you know well, think about a sibling, a parent, someone that you're in love with, a close friend. Somebody you know well is someone about whom I wanted to suggest is a person whose emotions and thoughts you probably can discern effortlessly. You can tell that when your friend's left eyebrow is fluttering like that, she's nervous. You can tell when your other friend's hands are clenching, he's probably angry. You can tell that when your mother stutters in a certain way, when her speech does not come out very evenly, she's upset about something. These are things we learn from very early on in our lives, and they seem to be confirmed by lots and lots of experience. That is to say, we seem to be able to know perfectly well, at least with the people that we know well, what's going on in their minds, and yet dualism seems to make a mystery of that phenomenon. So, by way of two objections, they're not reductio ad absurdum types of responses, but they're ways of putting some pressure on the dualist position. You might ask, even though the argument for dualism, in particular the body detachment argument, seems to be a powerful one, it seems to yield some surprising conclusions. So our question should be, should we accept dualism and just accept those surprising conclusions, or can we do better?